accept this for Lorraine Chargin.
In 1957, the San Francisco 49ers and the Detroit Lions finished the regular season tied for first place in the Western Conference of the NFL. This was in the day when there was only a Western Conference and an Eastern Conference. So they had to have a playoff game, and it was at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, with the winner to fight to play the Cleveland Browns for the NFL Championship. And the game sold out 60,000 tickets in less than a day. And if you remember back then, they had the 90-mile blackout rule where the game couldn't be shown in San Francisco. So a 29-year-old boxing promoter named Don Chargin thought he could make a buck by closed-circuiting the game into the ballroom of the Fairmount Hotel in downtown San Francisco. And he was right. The place was packed. He sold over 1,000 tickets, and at halftime the 49ers were up 24-7, and everybody was having a ball. And then fate stepped in, and the screen went blank, and they lost the signal, and the people in attendance went berserk. They wanted their money back, and they stampeded the box office, and there was Don Chargin trying to refund their money when a woman reached over with her nails and scratched the skin off the front of his face. And another man tried throwing punches. So what does a 29-year-old boxing promoter do in a situation like that? He took the money and ran. He ran down the hallway, out onto the street, followed by an angry mob. And there are pictures in the paper of this the following day. One guy ripped off the sleeve of his jacket. He jumped on a trolley, took it to the foot of the Golden Gate Bridge, ran into a man who was heading to Oakland, jumped in the car, went to Oakland, and got out at the entrance of a restaurant catering hall known as Villa de la Paix. He walked in there, bloody, battered, and bruised. He looked like he'd been thumbed by Fritzy Zivik and hit in the cup by Bummy Davis. And the first person he ran into was the banquet manager, a 27-year-old woman named Lorraine Chargin Lefrancois. You couldn't script this in Hollywood. I don't know if it was love at first sight what she was looking at, but from that day on, they were inseparable. One of the great love stories of all time. Imagine 24/7 for more than 52 years, forming one of the great 1-2 promotional teams in the history of boxing. They were more efficient than some promotional groups today that have 20 or 25 employees. They kept boxing alive in Northern California, from San Jose to Oakland, San Francisco to Sacramento, Eureka, Fresno. Sure, Don made the matches, but that's what he did, and Lorraine did everything else. She rented the arena, she hired the security, the ushers, the ticket takers, the ticket sellers. She took care of the liability insurance, the hotel accommodations, the travel arrangements, the food vouchers, the publicity, the posters, the flyers. She did it all. And then in 1964, they got a call from one of the greatest promoters who ever lived, the only woman prior to today who's been enshrined in Canastota. And her name was Eileen Eaton. And they asked him to come down to her office at the Olympic for a meeting where she hired Don Chargin to be her matchmaker, where he earned the nickname Warwick Chargin for the incredible fights he put on there for 20 years every Thursday night. And meeting Lorraine Chargin for the first time, Eileen Eaton was so impressed that she hired her as her building manager upon meeting her. Now it's funny, when a man is tough in business, he's known as a tough businessman. When a woman's tough in business, she's known as a nasty bitch. Or sometimes they get the moniker the Dragon Lady, which Eileen Eaton eventually passed down to Lorraine. First week on the job, Lorraine fired the head of the concessions, who'd been there for 25 years, when she found out that he had his own eatery in Pasadena and he was stealing food and beverages from the Olympic and taking it to his restaurant. Along the way, while they promoted in other cities, they did a fight in Sacramento, and a reluctant heavyweight named Pat Stapleton refused to come out for the main event and killed the show. So Don Chargin walked into the dressing room and picked up a revolver and put it in Pat Stapleton's ear and said something a little tougher than, "Son, do you think you might want to reconsider?" So Stapleton went through and put up what little fight he could, and later when Lorraine found out about it, she walked over to Don and said, "Chargin, you done good." They were in France when Loretta Garza was fighting Juan Koji for the title, and the French promoters were talking in French, and they were talking about that the officials were staying in a certain hotel, but don't tell the Chargins, not realizing that Lorraine Chargin was Lorraine LaFrancois and spoke fluent French. So they hightailed it over there to the hotel when the meeting was over, just to make sure everything was okay. And of course, if you weren't there, if you haven't heard about it, I was there at the Arco Arena in 1995. It was an HBO show. Lennox Lewis was fighting Lionel Butler, and Melvin Foster was fighting Michael Moore, and I was sitting with Don. Lorraine was at the back door checking in the fighters and the people who needed credentials, and Don King came in. He was representing Lionel Butler, and Don came in with an entourage. And you just didn't do this with Lorraine Chargin. So she said, "I can let you in, Don, and somebody with you, but the rest of the people will have to get tickets." Well, words were exchanged, and the entourage left, and somehow Don King got in. And I'm sitting with Don Chargin, and you see Don King coming out of the chute, going over to the press section, and right behind him, breathing fire, is Lorraine Chargin. So Don's got his back to her, and she goes up to Don and taps him on the back, and Don turns around, and Don can be an intimidating person. But Lorraine Chargin was no shrinking violet, and they went at it. And the head of security comes over to Don Chargin, who's intently watching the fights. And Don says, "There's a problem at ringside. I think you should go over there. Lorraine and Don King are getting into an argument." Don kept looking right at the fights. He said, "No, it's okay." And the head of security said, "Don, aren't you worried about Lorraine?" And Don turned and looked at the head of security and said, "No, I'm worried about King." I met Don in '72 and Lorraine in '77, and like everybody else in the boxing business who met Lorraine for the first time, I was guilty until proven innocent. But that's the way it is in the sometimes wonderful, sometimes wretched world of professional boxing, where loyalty runs as deep as the ink on a dollar bill. But they became my best friends in boxing for the last 40 years. Their word was better than anybody's signature, especially today when the negotiations don't start until after the contracts are signed. And we did a lot of business together. She sat in my office one day about 15 years ago when we were doing a fight together at the Blue Horizon, and she said to me, "Russell, I need 6 tickets for my family. What's ringside cost?" I said, "What's the difference? You're not paying." She said, "Honey." And when Lorraine Chargin said honey, she didn't say honey, she said, "Honey, we pay our own way." She was as good as it gets. We exchanged phone calls, gifts at Christmas. I was fortunate enough to be their house guest at their homes in Bell Canyon and in Cambria. And I was there in Tucson in November of 2008 when Lorraine got sick for the first time. I had a fighter fighting for Don, and she came down one day and said she had pain in her back and we thought it was shingles. And then the next year it turned into cancer. And then in early 2010, she went into the hospital. And she told Don, make sure Russell calls me. I want to hear from him. We spoke on the phone because my sister had passed away from similar cancer a year before, but it beat the doctor's prognosis by 4 years. And Lorraine said, if I can get half of that time, I'll be happy. But it didn't happen. Lorraine Chargin passed away in April of 2010. And they had a memorial service for her in a restaurant in Cambria. And everybody who was anybody in West Coast boxing went there. And about 5 of us got up to speak. And the man I remember most was Loretta Garza. All the fighters that Lorraine Chargin had dealt with in 40, 50 years, all the thousands that she had dealt with, Loretta Garza was her favorite. Loretta Garza was a blue-collar fighter who came to work with his lunchbox and his thermos, and he never was flashy, and he never created any problems. And out of nowhere, he went to France and won the WBA junior welterweight title when nobody expected it. He defended it once against Vinny Pazienza. He lost it, won 3 more fights, and when he couldn't get another title fight, he retired. When Loretta Garza got up to speak that day, he knew that he was Lorraine Chargin's favorite fighter. And he said that he was humbled and honored that out of all the thousands of fighters that she knew, that he was her favorite. And before Lorraine passed away, she told Don that if she ever made it to the Hall of Fame, that she wanted me to give the speech. And that's how I feel today. I'm honored and humbled. Thank you.